Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people on purpose follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, we've got supermarket Karens getting embarrassed, nightmare bosses regretting giving out orders, and one OP tells a story of a phone call that goes completely sideways for a cheap Karen. You won't want to miss this one. So grab a drink, relax, and seriously, don't shake your heads too hard at some of these posts today. Let's dive in. So prior to being a bartender, I worked at a giant retail chain. Let's just call it Big W. It's a slow Wednesday afternoon, and the AC's broken again. It's about 5 degrees hotter inside than it is outside, which is 29 degrees Celsius, or 85 Fahrenheit. I am in autopilot, rigor mortis smile on my face, and retail greetings droning out of my throat. That's when a guy walks to my register, demanding a refund for something trivial. Probably his panties were the wrong color, I don't remember. I inform him in a monotone voice that refunds are issued by my supervisor, not me. There's surprisingly a long line at the supervisor's desk, people wanting cigarettes, refunds, or information. The guy informs me that he's not waiting that long for something trivial. No, the guy demands I do it, saying to me, even someone as dumb as you can issue a refund. Well, that snaps me out of autopilot and the smile fades. I repeat in a much more direct tone that only the supervisor can do refunds. The customer is having none of it, and he says, refund my item. The guy's saying it very slowly, as if I was the dumbest potato in the strawberry patch. I then respond, I'm unable to. He then cuts me off, and he says, I want to speak to your manager. I don't want to talk to you. Now, this is where people need to be careful with their words. As a cashier, I report directly to my supervisor, one of the two at the desk. My manager sits out back managing the store, and usually never has to interact with customers unless the supervisor calls him. So I nod, calling through the headset for my manager, who we'll call Fred. Fred's a great guy. He tells good jokes, and he's always willing to help his friends, and he's a caring soul. Fred's also mute, and after an accident when he was a teen, he's also deaf. As such, he knows sign language, but he can't read lips to save his life. I also can't speak sign language at all. This probably took about 5 minutes for someone to alert Fred that he was needed and for him to come down. All this time, I'm smiling, but I'm not saying a word to the gentleman as he told me to. Fred comes up to the registers, sees it's me waving him down, and pulls out his PDA, personal digital assistant, to communicate with me. Fred types, "What's up?" I take the PDA and I type, "Customer has a complaint, wants to speak to my manager, not me." Fred raises an eyebrow at me, and I just shrug. Meanwhile, the guy's turning red with anger, thinking we're ignoring him. The guy's threatening to get both of us fired. That's when Fred turns to the guy, who launches into a full-on verbal assault that would curdle milk. Something about incompetent employees and terrible service. The whole time, Fred just stands there, not even fazed. Eventually, the guy runs out of breath, and Fred has a chance to show him the PDA with the words, "Sir, I'm a deaf mute. Please use this to communicate with me." Fred hands him the PDA, and the guy practically screams and storms out of the store. Talk about a complaint falling on deaf ears, and in this case, literal deaf ears, guys. But yeah, not much you can do to recover after that tantrum other than to screech and leaving the store, right? And this next OP shares a similar story, where another customer doesn't get what he expects. While in university, I was working in a popular supermarket chain as a team supervisor. I worked evenings, so this meant I was essentially in charge of the checkouts as there was no managers in. I wore a headset, and if the cashiers needed assistance, they would buzz me and I would go help. Now, it wouldn't say what help was needed on the headset, just which number checkout. One night, I'm in the middle of the store putting away some items. My headset tells me that checkout 4 needs help. On it. So as I'm walking over, checkout 8 also buzzes. Fine, I'll go there next. It takes a good couple of minutes before I get to checkout number 4. Some discounted items weren't going through and I needed to authorize something. It took about 3 minutes to put all the items that the customer wanted in, and then make my way over to checkout number 8. As I'm approaching, I can hear this guy causing a scene. The guy's moaning about how long the stupid supervisor's taking and how incompetent we clearly are. As I get closer, I can see this middle-aged man with his arms in the air in a come on gesture. He's complaining to the cashier that he's been on his feet all day, and all he effing wants is another box of eggs, and that he's gonna make the manager walk to the other end of the store to get the eggs for him. I walk up to him and I'm super polite, and I ask how I can help. The guy turns with the biggest frown, and I fully expect him to rip me a new one. But alas, the guy suddenly looks sheepish and his body visibly shrinks in shame. The reason being, dear readers, is I was 8 months pregnant at the time and I was as big as a house. The cashier then explains that the eggs the man chose are broken and he needs a new box. Immediately, the guy stutters and says, well, I can go get them, don't you? I just stop him right there and I say, no, that's okay, sir. I heard you complaining that you've been on your feet all day, so let this stupid manager walk to the other end of the store to get you your eggs, no worries. And with that, I waddle away and take my time. So a few years ago, I used to work as a swim instructor while in college. It was an exhausting job being in the water all day, but I did like it for the most part because I got to interact and teach kids. As much as I liked the job, I absolutely despised my manager. The guy demanded too much and he refused to compensate the employees for any of his demands. For example, I gave him my availability of when I can work because I was also a full-time student and had another job. Well, he took this as a light suggestion and he scheduled me to become subs for other instructors as he pleased, even going as far as to schedule me during my class hours. I would remind him firmly that my availability was the only time I can work. And the guy always gave me the same BS, saying, if you can't be flexible with your work, then we're going to have to let you go and find someone who is. Now, I put up with it because I had to pay for rent and some of my tuition that financial aid didn't cover. However, the last straw was when I had to call in sick to work for a time that I shouldn't have been scheduled to come in anyways because I was throwing up. I had severe food poisoning and it was coming out both ends. I'd have to be on the toilet every hour or so. I was definitely not in a stage to be going out. I emailed my professors and I called my other job for the next day. None of them gave me a hard time, just wanted me to recover and feel better. And then I called my manager for the swim school I worked at. I say to him, listen, I know you have me scheduled for today. I'm sorry, but I really can't come in. I've been throwing up all day. I have food poisoning. I'm going to see a doctor today, and I can bring a note if you want. And my manager responds, no, you can't do that. No one else can come in to cover for you. Now, mind you, I was already covering for someone else this shift without being asked. I respond, I normally can't work Thursdays anyways. I really can't be there today. I don't want to throw up in the middle of a lesson. This is when my dumb manager says to me, just don't eat anything and try to throw it all up before you get here. Easy as that. You have to show up. There's no one else. If you don't, it'll be another write-up for you on top of the one you got last week. I tell him, but I've scheduled to see a doctor today. He then responds, doesn't sound like my problem. And here's a side note. I got the last write-up because I was 2 minutes late to work because there was an emergency vehicle covering the only entrance to work. At least half of the employees were late that morning and every single employee got a write-up. I really should have stayed home, but I was stupid. I managed to show up to work on time and I was clearly sick. My other coworkers could tell as soon as I walked in, and they asked me rather incredulously as to why I even show up to work. I just laughed it off and I told them I had bills to pay. It was around 3 p.m. I was waiting in the water for my class to show up when I could feel my mouth salivate, and I could feel the strong sudden urge to throw up. I jumped out of the water and ran to the nearest restroom. While I'm emptying the contents of my stomach, my manager was banging on the door, yelling at me because I was late to my class. I was literally feeling like death, and I told him I don't think I can make it in between vomits. He told me he wouldn't give me any more hours, which was his way of firing someone if I didn't show up to my class. He literally said, "Don't you dare leave the pool again." I just rinsed off my mouth and went back to the pool. I went back to my lane and saw it was empty. I asked my coworker next to me if any of my kids have even shown up yet. He told me that one of them called out, and the other two weren't even there yet, and I was absolutely pissed. Like, my manager was harassing me while I was throwing up, when none of my kids were even there yet. It was right then and there I felt another urge to throw up, as you know, food poisoning. Cue the malicious compliance. The guy told me not to leave the pool again, so I didn't. At that point, I just said F it. I spewed my stomach contents in the pool. It was honestly disgusting, and yes, I was sitting in my own throw up, but I felt like crap and I didn't give an F. I did what I was told, and I showed up to my non-existent class on time. The pool was immediately cleared and shut down. Thankfully, the lane next to me was doing laps and was nowhere close to where the throw-up was. My manager was livid. The guy began to yell at me in front of all of my coworkers, the kids, and their parents for throwing up in the pool. He basically screamed at me and said, "Now why the F would you do that? Why didn't you go to the bathroom?" I told him, "I have no control over this. I told you I was sick." He then screams at me and says, "Help them clean this up, and then come see me in my office after." He then storms out to go to his office to wait for me. My coworkers could see that I was feeling worse, and they told me not to worry about cleaning up as they've got it covered. I guess it was at that moment I felt completely disgusted with how he was treating me, and I decided I've had enough. I got up and I walked to his office to confront my manager. When I walked in, he was glaring at me with his arms crossed, and he says, "You know I'm going to have to write you up for this one, right?" I just tell him, "Forget it, I quit." He then says, "You can't do that. You have to give at least 2 weeks notice. Who's going to cover your classes?" I respond, "Doesn't sound like my problem." I then excuse myself and I clocked out for the last time. I'll always remember that stupid look on his face when I told him I wasn't dealing with his crap anymore. My coworkers texted me later on telling me that they had to shut down the entire pool for the whole day and cancel classes to clean up. They told me not to worry about it because everyone else got the rest of the day off paid, and it wasn't my fault that I was forced to show up to work. My manager got an earful from upper management about having to shut down the place. They also heard him talking to the district manager about me. He said that I threw up because I was hungover from partying the night before. The district manager did call me the next day to ask my side of the story, and I told him everything. He was very understanding about it. I told him I had a doctor's note clearly stating that I was in no condition to be teaching. I also told him about the complete disrespect for my time, and all the times my crappy manager asked me to come in when I was clearly not available. He asked me if he could talk to me in person and if I would like to come back. I told him I appreciate him reaching out to me, but I wouldn't be coming back anymore. I honestly would rather chew on my own leg than work for that guy again. And because of what happened with me, similar incidents that happened to other coworkers were brought up. How they were forced to show up to work while they were sick. One of them had an ear infection and was told by his doctor that he's not allowed to be in the pool, and one other had pink eye. It didn't take long before my manager was fired by upper management. By the time they replaced him, I'd found a better paying job with more flexible hours. However, I'll never forget the satisfaction I got for being right about being sick and shutting down the pool, indirectly exposing his mistreatment of the staff to upper management. Seriously, don't you just love a good story where a crappy manager gets what they deserve? And in this case, I think OP's manager should have been fired a long time ago because the guy was dangerously awful. Like, what is it about some managers and wanting people who are practically on their deathbed to come in? Also, gotta love the fact that OP got to throw the whole "doesn't sound like my problem" line right back at the guy. Oh, the good, cruel irony, right? I used to be a sales manager for a B2B services company. We provided a service to businesses. Unlike a lot of companies, we would not auto-renew a client service unless they signed a new contract. The contracts were generally for 1 to 3 years. All of our contracts were signed on an iPad that recorded the GPS coordinates of where the document was signed. Also, we emailed the client a copy of the agreement instantly. In the email, we basically said, if you disagree with this contract or would like to make changes, contact us within 5 business days. If you don't, we will move forward and bill accordingly. In addition, one of the cancellation terms in the contract was dishonesty. If a client could prove we were dishonest, they had the right to cancel without penalty. If the client acted dishonestly, we had the right to cancel their contract with us. There was one client that was actually quite a small account, but always proved to cause a lot of headache for my reps. I remember calling the rep and going over the common issues I've had with this client, and I stressed, get the signature on the iPad in his office. I also stressed that if he wanted to cancel, let him cancel because he's proven to be very difficult to work with. The salesman went to the sales call, the signature was signed, the client service was executed according to the terms of the contract. Well, 4 months later, I get this email from a customer service rep that the client's claiming that my salesman forged the client's signature. I did my due diligence before calling the client. Number 1, I checked where the newest contract was signed, and it was signed in the client's place of business via the iPad. Number 2, I compared the signature on the newest contract to the many signatures on the numerous contracts we had on file with the same signer from the client. They were all very close. Number 3, I also looked at the email that went right to the client after the contract was signed. The client opened the link to see his contract 65 minutes after the contract was signed and did nothing. Also, the link was open for several minutes. And lastly, I looked up the client's current billing status and he was 45 days behind. He knew we wouldn't start charging late fees until 60 days behind, and at 120 days, we would have began litigation/collection account status. So I call up the client, and this is how the call went. I say to him, "Hello, this is Luther from ABC. I was told that you're accusing my sales rep of forging your signature on the renewal." The client says, "Yes, I never agreed to pay that much. I never would have. I told him to give me a discount, and I wanted to see it in writing before I signed." I respond, "And did he give you a discount and show it to you in writing?" The client responds, "No, he said he had to go talk to his boss and I never heard back from him." I then asked, "Okay, and then what happened?" He then says, "Well, y'all kept up the service and I noticed on my billing it hadn't gone down, but up in cost. And I looked back in my emails and I saw the sales rep forged my signature. That's illegal." I respond, "Yes, you're right. If the salesperson did forge your signature, that is illegal." He then says, "Good to see that we agree on that." I then go on and say, after the contract was signed, regardless if the signature was forged or not, you would have gotten an email with the link to the contract, asking you to verify that everything is correct, and if it's not, to let us know within 5 business days. Did you get that email? If you did get the email, did you review the contract? The client says, "Yes, but I was pretty busy and I didn't open the email until recently." I respond, "I totally get it. We're busy nowadays. So assuming he did forge the signature, what would you consider an acceptable resolution to this? Would you want to end your service with no penalty, or would you like a discount?" The client says, "I want a discount." I respond, "And what would you consider an acceptable discount?" He then says, 3 months of free service. I tell him, "Got it. Well, Mr. Client, before I fire this salesperson for forgery and offer you a discount, I'd like to see if we can address those problems." He says, "Sounds fair." I say to him, the signature was captured on our iPads, which records the GPS coordinates of where the signature happened. Per the GPS coordinates, it happened inside your place of business. He then says, well, he knows that, right? I confirm and say, yes, he did. The client then says, well, that just means he forged it inside my building. I then say, okay, well, the next issue is that the signature on the renewal contract looks exactly like the previous contracts. The client says, well, he just copied my signature. I know I didn't sign that. I then go on and ask, could it be possible that someone else in your company signed it? He says, no, everyone here knows that I'm the only one that gets to sign those contracts. I respond, I understand. The next issue I have with your claim is the link to the contract that was emailed to you was opened 65 minutes after the contract was signed. He then argues and says, no, it wasn't. I say to him, yes, sir, it was. The reason why we have you click a link to view the signed contract is so we know if you opened the link or not. Not only that, it appears the link was opened for several minutes, which to me would indicate the person who opened that link reviewed the contract. Also, the fact that no one ever responded to the email would indicate to me the person who reviewed the contract was fine. The client gets pissed and says, are you accusing me of lying? I respond, yes, and because of that, I will be canceling your service with us effective immediately. How would you like to pay your current balance? He then screams at me and says, you're canceling my service and you want me to pay? I respond, yes, I want you to pay for the services we provided. He then says, well, I'm not going to pay. I respond, if you're not going to pay for the services we provided, I'm going to refer you to our collections department and they will add late fees, and if you don't pay them, they will refer you to our law firm for litigation. This is when the client says, we have a contract, you can't just cancel my service. I respond, actually, I can, since I do have good reason to believe you're lying about the accusation that my salesperson forged your signature. Everything I have says you signed it. And our contract states that we'll cancel your contract for being dishonest, and that's what we're going to do. He then screams and says, F you effing useless. And at that point, I just hang up the phone. I referred the client to collections, and he did eventually pay them without us having to sue him. Yeah, it's gotta be the best feeling when you're able to catch someone lying and have that much proof to back it up, leaving them unable to do anything but swear at you in the end. Also, shame on that client. Like, you're willing to lie to that extent and risk an innocent man's job all to get 3 months of free service? Like, some people are freaking horrible, I tell you. But you know what's not horrible? A good boss for a change who cares about their workers. This last OP shares a super wholesome malicious compliance. So this isn't my story, but the story of a friend of mine who I'm going to call Steve. Steve owns a landscaping business and he has several employees. They work hard and they all get along really well. Steve pays them for their work done by the yard, not by the hour, in addition to buying his workers 2 meals a day. That said, Steve hires a guy named Jim. Jim's not a bad worker at all. Jim's just a little slow on the uptake sometimes. One day, Jim decided to start a fuss. He says to Steve, I don't like that we're getting paid by the yard. I want to be paid by the hour. So Steve then explained to Jim that when you break it down, being paid by the yard comes out to over $10 an hour, about $22 an hour in today's money, as this was back in the 80s, or more, depending on how many yards you get done, and his hourly workers only make minimum wage. Steve further explained that paid by the yard workers get perks, like meals, and they operate on a true merit pay, because the more they get done, the more they get paid. Jim was adamant though, so Steve agreed. On day number 1, Jim showed up, ready to go. He decided to prove to Steve that being hourly doesn't mean he'll slack off. And like I said, Jim's a good guy, not a bad worker. The guy has good work ethic and a big sense of pride. A couple of yards got done, and it's lunchtime. Steve grabs everyone's order, and he asks Jim if he's going to buy anything. Jim looks confused and said, "Well, what do you mean?" That's when Steve re-explained to him, "If you're going hourly, I can't cover your meals anymore. You have to buy your own lunch." Jim grumbled, but he ordered something small, and after lunch, they all got back to work. On day number 2, the crew was down 2 guys. Jim was in a good mood because less guys on the crew meant less yards done, but Jim was gonna make the same amount either way. With a bit of a smug attitude, Jim got ready for work, but when he looked at the job list for the day, he was taken aback. Steve had rearranged the yards for the week so that for this particular day, they would be working on their smallest yard clients. That way, the workers would get paid around the same amount they normally would if they had a full crew. Jim never noticed that Steve did this anytime he had a smaller crew, because it guaranteed that his guys were making the same pay. It kept their pay consistent. On day number 3, they got a lot of yards done this day. In fact, they worked really well together that day. They really dug their heels in to get the last few yards done on the schedule done. They'd taken about 2 hours less than expected, so everyone was able to head home early. Jim asked if he could maybe go take on another yard or 2 himself, since if everybody got off early, he wouldn't be paid anymore. Steve understood, and he sent Jim out to get some hedges done, which took a couple of hours because he was doing it by himself. But that was okay because that was a couple of extra hours of pay, and Steve was nothing if not fair. On day number 4, Jim shows up to work a little late because the extra 3 hours of hedge trimming left him exhausted. Steve was placing an order for breakfast as he shows up, and he just stood there for a few minutes as he watched Steve writing down orders for bacon, eggs, and pancakes. Finally, Steve stopped at Jim. Steve didn't say anything about Jim's tardiness, but it was clear that Jim had worked hard the previous night. Steve asked him, "Are you buying anything, Jim?" Jim swallowed hard and said, "No, sir." Steve then says, "It'll be mighty hard to work on an empty stomach, Jim." Jim nodded and said, "Yes, sir, I know, but..." And again, I have to mention how much pride Jim had. He really couldn't buck up enough to admit he miscalculated. He knew he was wrong, but he was prepared to suffer. Steve, however, was a good dude. He recognized where Jim had made a mistake, and he didn't lord it over him. He made it plain and simple. He said, "I'll just put you down for some eggs and bacon then." And with an understanding and appreciative look, Jim started packing the truck for the morning. They never really discussed moving back to per yard rate, but Steve was nothing if not fair. Jim got his next paycheck to find that he had been paid per yard as if they hadn't changed his rate at all. This meant not only did he end up with a better rate, he even got some extra money on his paycheck for the 3 yards worth of hedges he'd done by himself. Jim stuck around a long time, and he ended up managing the crew after a while. My friend Steve always tells people that if you treat your employees right, they'll stick around, and that's worth way more than a handful of pinched pennies. Ain't that the absolute truth? And I only wish more managers would get this in their head. Like with all the stories I read daily about nightmare Karen bosses power tripping, acting like their workers are their slaves, it's truly a breath of fresh air to read a story about an honest, hardworking, salt-of-the-earth type owner who treats his employees right. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled_people episode, where psycho Karens are running wild and one even blocks an ambulance and has the audacity to scream at them. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.